Hello there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barrett.
And I'm Chaz Chidale.
This week, the latest on the Trump trial and the trial you might not have heard of. A senator accused of taking bribes from foreign governments.
We're going to be lawyering up with Anna Cominsky in New York, and I'll be looking at Biden's pause on weapons to Israel. But first,
Donald Trump's former personal attorney and self-described fixer, Michael Cohen, has taken the witness stand in the New York City hush money trial.
Testifying about several instances where he paid people off to kill news stories to protect the 2016 Trump campaign. And Cohen directly implicated Trump, at one point telling the jury, quote, "What I was doing was at the direction of and benefit of Mr. Trump."
And according to Cohen, when it came to the hush money to Stormy Daniels, Trump told him to, quote, "just do it." Cohen told the court that Trump was clearly worried about the political impact if Daniels were to have told her story of their alleged sexual encounter, describing it as, quote, "a total disaster and that women will hate me." Proving Cohen paid Daniels the hush money on Trump's orders to protect Trump politically before the 2016 election is key to this case. And jurors didn't just have Cohen's word for it, they also played tapes.
When it comes time for the financing, which will be...
Listen, what financing?
We'll have to pay you, so...
I'll pay for care.
Legal analyst Norm Eisen was among those in the courtroom this week, and he described Cohen's first day of testimony as the day that the prosecution crossed the barrier of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But not everyone is convinced by Cohen. Former President Trump has been bringing some high-profile supporters to court with him, including vice presidential shortlisters like Ohio Senator J.D. Vance.
Does any reasonable, sensible person believe anything that Michael Cohen says? I don't think that they should, and I actually think that his testimony is going to hurt with any reasonable juror.
And former presidential rivals of Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, have also been in court with Trump. Even Speaker Mike Johnson turned up today. And as a former prosecutor, he had this assessment of Michael Cohen.
This is a man who is clearly on a mission for personal revenge and who is widely known as a witness who has trouble with the truth. He is someone who has a history of perjury and is well known for it.
And that's certainly one way for Trump to skirt a gag order, get his surrogates to say it for him. And after 9 hours of questioning from prosecutors, it was time for Trump's defence team to cross-examine Cohen. And they're painting him in similar terms to Mike Johnson. Cohen, they say, is a liar out for revenge. They quoted extensively from his social media posts, podcasts, and one of his books titled Disloyal, where Cohen describes himself wanting power, the good life, public acclaim, big deals, fast cars, private planes, the excess and glamour and zest for life. Trump's lead attorney, Todd Blanche, asked Cohen whether he called Trump a boorish cartoon misogynist and a Cheeto-dusted cartoon villain. Cohen replied, "Sounds like something I'd say." Well, for more, we're joined once again by Professor Anna Cominsky from the New York Law School, where she's director of the Criminal Defense Clinic. Professor, welcome back to Planet America.
So nice to see you as well.
So how do you think prosecutors are going to be feeling about Michael Cohen's testimony so far?
Well, actually, I think that they're probably feeling a little optimistic. I wouldn't say overly optimistic, but a little optimistic. And the reason I say that is because they've really gotten out from him everything that they need to get out. And I think surprising to a lot of us, they were able to get it out pretty smoothly. Cohen was quite a calm witness during direct examination. He didn't seem to be very flustered. He, was able to answer the questions with ease. And these are the type of things that they've been concerned about. At least it's our understanding, right? These are things that they're going to be concerned about. And so far, it seems like he's handled himself quite well on the witness stand. So I think overall, they're going to be optimistic with respect to his direct examination. But of course, as you know, his cross has just started, and that's really where the work begins.
Professor, the defence have begun their cross-examination, and it seems that they're trying to paint Michael Cohen as a bit obsessed with Trump, first desperately wanting his boss's approval, now demanding his destruction. Do you think that is the right story for them to be telling this jury?
I do. I think there's a couple of different angles that the defense could take with respect to Cohen, all of which would probably be effective. But I think where the trap is and where they don't seem to be going right now is just calling him a liar because there have been times that he's lied before, right? A lot of times juries will believe someone who has lied in the past, but is testifying now and says, even though I've lied in the past, I'm being truthful. And so the trap would be to just hammer on him that he's a liar and nothing else. And these are very experienced defense attorneys. It's not surprising to me that that's not the only avenue that they're taking. Don't worry, I know that they will go there, but they're sort of taking all the approaches. And that's important because they really want the jury to understand that not only is Cohen, in their mind, a liar, but also he has a lot of reasons why he would be lying. And that's what's really important.
Professor, such a critical part of this case is whether the hush money should be properly considered a campaign expense for Trump or a personal expense. So what standard does the prosecution team need to meet to show that the hush money should have been declared a campaign expense?
Right. So what they have to prove is they have to show that however these documents were recorded in the Trump organization, that they were done so fraudulently, right? And that they have to show this intent to defraud. So if there was any part of this that had to do with unlawfully affecting the election, then the idea that it was also for something else is just ancillary. So if it was to unlawfully affect the election and also to shield his wife, it's still illegal. However, if it was only done in the interest of his family and his wife, that would not support the campaign election fraud idea, and therefore it would not rise to the felony level.
Professor, you previously told us that the prosecutors need to prove Trump's intent. Analysts like Norm Eisen say that they feel that they have now successfully done that. Do you agree?
I would agree with that. I mean, what we have to do is at this point, if we're trying to figure out whether they've met that burden, what we have to say is if the jury believe the witnesses that have testified so far, and if they find credible the other pieces of evidence that have been put in front of them, like those pieces of paper, could they find Trump guilty? And the answer right now is yes. But of course, there's two sides to the story, right? And part of that is finishing the case, the cross-examination, whether there's in fact a defense case, and what the jury ultimately determines.
And finally, Professor, can I ask you, what do you make of the presence of all these senators and even the Speaker of the House by Trump's side in court? Tactically, what is that aimed at doing? Is it targeting the jury or somebody else?
I actually take that more to be messaging to the witnesses who are testifying, less messaging to the jurors necessarily. Jurors do pay attention to who's in the courtroom. They notice whether or not the defendant has people sitting on their side. The difference here is the courtroom is packed. So it's very hard for jurors to tell who's on whose side because this courtroom is literally packed with people, both for the prosecution, for the defense, and also journalists and media people. So as far as its effect on the jury, I'm not sure that it will have a real effect. I think this was more a show of force for the witnesses who were coming in and also potentially to show support just for Trump himself and to sort of give him that morale boost.
Professor Anna Cominsky, many thanks indeed for being with us on Planet America.
Thank you so much for having me.
And if you're finding it hard to keep up with the various state and federal criminal cases Donald Trump is facing, on Planet America, we're here to help. President Trump is currently facing 91 felony counts in 2 state and 2 federal cases. The New York State hush money case was the first time that a former president had been criminally indicted. It's the first to go to trial and it may be the last. The other state case is in Georgia, where Trump is accused of conspiring to steal the 2020 election under anti-racketeering or RICO laws. The case is due to go to trial in August, but a delay is likely because of a scandal around the romantic relationship between the district attorney who brought the charges, Fani Willis, and the special prosecutor she appointed, Nathan Wade. Meanwhile, both of the federal cases against Donald Trump are on hold. The Washington, D.C. election subversion case brought by special counsel Jack Smith was due to go to trial back in March, but it remains in legal limbo as the US Supreme Court, which includes 3 justices appointed by Trump, considers his claim of sweeping presidential immunity. They're expected to rule in late June or maybe July, but could throw the issue back to the lower courts to decide, making it unlikely it'll get underway before November's election. the Florida federal case involving 37 charges relating to Trump's illegal removal of official documents when he left the White House in 2021 is perhaps the simplest case to prove against Trump. He not only took them and stored them in unsecure locations at his properties, including a toilet, he also refused to give them back when the government asked for them. But the Trump-appointed judge, Aileen Cannon, has slow-walked the trial, which is now postponed indefinitely and very unlikely to proceed before the election. And if Trump wins the election, he can appoint an Attorney General who'll make it go away. Two other major civil cases against Trump have already been decided this year. In one, he was convicted of fraud. In the other, he was found liable for defamation and sexual abuse. But despite a damages bill approaching $500 million, so far the polls suggest voters don't seem to mind.
Now to what Joe Biden thought was going to be a subtle little nudge for Israel. According to the administration, the plan was to halt a single shipment of arms due to be flown to Israel as a confidential signal that it shouldn't be moving towards a Rafah offensive without a plan to safeguard civilians. But the decision began to leak from Israeli officials, and then all hell broke loose. Biden faced pressure from Israeli politicians, saying Hamas loves Biden. Very constructive there. He also faced pressure from MAGA Republicans when they pulled this 2019 tweet out, where Biden wrote, Trump withheld congressionally appropriated aid to Ukraine unless they granted him a political favour. It's the definition of quid pro quo. He must be impeached. And so, Republican Corey Mills prepared impeachment articles for Biden, saying the House has no choice but to impeach President Quid Pro Joe Biden, and Biden is pressuring Israel, our biggest ally in the Middle East, by pausing their funding that has already been approved in the House if they don't stop all operations against Hamas. It's a very clear message. This for that. Now, the difference is, of course, that Biden isn't asking for personal benefits here, like Trump was, but Mills would argue, presumably, that Biden's just doing that to get re-elected, and that's for his personal benefit. Either way, it's pressure. Conservative media hasn't exactly been restrained with their headlines either, like, Biden sides with Satan. Biden's also facing pressure from never-Trumpers. They're saying, I've heard from a lot of reliably anti-Trump people. I mean really, really anti-Trump people who have had it with Biden tonight. Biden's even facing pressure from Democrats, like Congressman Brad Sherman, who found the delays in sending guided munitions particularly concerning. He asked, how in the hell can you criticise Israel for being imprecise in its bombing and then refuse to deliver them what they're willing to pay for to make their bombs precise? And most worryingly for Biden, he's facing pressure from Democrat donors, with Democratic mega donor Haim Saban telling the administration, let's not forget there are more Jewish voters who care about Israel than Muslim voters who care about Hamas. Now, obviously, contrary to some of these statements, Biden is actually concerned about unnecessary Palestinian casualties, not Hamas's feelings. But that seems to have been largely ignored in the hubbub, as has the fact that the Israeli military apparently has enough weapons already to conduct a Rafah operation, even if America doesn't get on board. Meanwhile, if we look at the number of truckloads of aid getting into Gaza lately, it's pretty much zero. And that's going to create even more pressure very soon. So given all that context, a report this week could have really thrown a cat amongst the pigeons. It's Biden's policy to report to Congress whether US weapons have been used to violate international law, whether there have been failures to implement best practices for civilian harm mitigation, and whether there have been restrictions on humanitarian aid. And if there have been, a number of laws could require the US to suspend certain arms transfers or security assistance. Now, that's all on top of what Biden just did. So, what was the result? Well, international humanitarian law requires countries to take all feasible precautions to minimise civilian injuries and deaths. And in the case of Israel, well, the report says that Israel has the knowledge, the experience and the tools to implement best practices for mitigating civilian harm in its military operations. But the results on the ground, including high levels of civilian casualties, raise substantial questions as to whether they're sufficiently using those tools. However, the report did say that the US had no hard proof of Israeli violations. Sounds like 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. The report also said that a key consideration for them in providing more military aid was that Israel had opened criminal investigations into the military's conduct, with hundreds of incidents being examined. As for humanitarian aid, well, the report found several Israeli government actions had impeded the delivery of humanitarian aid, but not necessarily in an arbitrary manner, which means it doesn't technically violate the language of Biden's policy. They're trying very hard to not deprive Israel of those weapons. So there you go. Republicans, of course, see this whole report as stabbing Israel in the back, and an independent human rights task force described the report as, at best, incomplete, and at worst, intentionally misleading in defence of acts and behaviours that likely violate international humanitarian law and might amount to war crimes. So, in summary, John, everyone's now even angrier with the Biden administration.
Mission accomplished. Now to the political trial getting underway this week that would be attracting a whole lot more public attention if it weren't for the fact that a former president is also facing a criminal trial right now.
I firmly believe that when all the facts are presented, not only will I be exonerated, but I still will be the New Jersey's senior senator.
Meet Bob Menendez. He's 70 years old, a three-term Democratic senator from New Jersey. First elected in 2006, he was the chairman of the influential Senate Foreign Relations Committee until...
The indictment alleges that Senator Menendez used his power and influence, including his leadership role on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, to benefit the government of Egypt in various ways.
That included sending US aid and weapons to the Egyptians. He's also accused of taking actions to the benefit of the government of Qatar, and...
he's also accused of enriching a trio of business partners who also pleaded not guilty.
In return, prosecutors allege Menendez and his wife of 4 years, Nadine, took bribes. Big bribes, evidence of which was uncovered in an FBI raid on the Menendez home and a safety deposit box.
They discovered approximately $500,000 of cash stuffed into envelopes and closets. Some of the cash was stuffed in the senator's jacket pockets.
And the jacket literally had Menendez's name embroidered on it. And the DNA of one of those businessmen was found on one of the envelopes of cash in the pocket. It looks pretty bad, but Bob has an explanation.
For 30 years, I have withdrawn thousands of dollars in cash from my personal savings account, which I have kept for emergencies and because of the history of my family facing confiscation in Cuba.
Now, it's worth noting that Bob Menendez was born in New York in 1954 after his parents immigrated from Cuba, and that was 5 years before the Cuban Revolution. It's also worth noting that this is not the first time Bob Menendez has been accused of being corrupt.
Menendez stood accused of accepting private flights, campaign contributions, and other gifts from multiple...
He allegedly accepted gifts and vacations in return for favours to a wealthy Florida eye doctor. But that trial ended in a deadlocked jury in 2017, and the case was abandoned. This time, on top of the cash and gold bars, Nadine Menendez also accepted a luxury car as a gift from one of those accused businessmen. And here's why she needed a new car.
Surveillance video shows the incident. The car that hit Mr. Coop was driven by the soon-to-be wife of U.S. Senator Robert Menendez.
Didn't do anything wrong. He jumped on my windshield.
49-year-old Richard Coop died of his injuries. Nadine was not tested for drugs or alcohol, and she refused to show police her phone to see if she'd been texting at the time of the collision. She was released without charge. Meanwhile, there may be more to those businessmen than it seems. The FBI has been looking into possible links with the Egyptian intelligence service and their links to Nadine Menendez.
All I humbly ask for in this moment...
Bob Menendez maintains he's done nothing illegal. So, was he set up? Was his wife a part of an elaborate plot by foreign intelligence? Or...
Towers of gold are still too little.
Is Bob Menendez just a crooked politician who finally went too far and got caught? We may soon find out.
Never be enough for me.
And to flesh out those previous corruption charges for Menendez that you mentioned, John, he was previously accused of taking gifts, including a luxury hotel stay, private jet flights and campaign donations from an eye doctor, Salomon Melgen, allegedly in return for helping Melgen get US visas for his girlfriends, intervening in his Medicare fraud dispute, and assisting with a port security contract in the Dominican Republic. The main reason he didn't go down for that, though, was simply because the Supreme Court tightened the rules of corruption trials, requiring prosecutors to show a direct connection between gifts accepted by a public official and favours as official acts. But Menendez, the whole time, maintained he was persecuted because people couldn't believe a Latino kid who grew up poor could somehow become a US senator without doing things that are wrong. That must be it. Then only weeks after the DOJ dropped Menendez's first corruption charges, he started dating his now wife, who within weeks again had alerted an Egyptian friend, Wael Hannah, that she was dating Menendez, and then off we went to the races on these corruption allegations. Sadly though, John, there may be trouble in paradise, because Menendez has indicated he might take the stand to blame his wife for everything, suggesting she kept information from him and he was unaware of all her many illegal activities. Oh dear, if those crazy love-struck kids can't make it, John, then who can? Now look, you might have thought Republicans would be enjoying seeing a Democrat being prosecuted, but Conservative podcaster Charlie Kirk is smelling a rat.
They're doing this to create the appearance of impartiality, so that they can continue their jihad against Donald Trump.
And that must be it as well.
Yeah.
Although Trump himself has an interesting relationship with Menendez. Back when Menendez first got off corruption charges, a prankster called Trump up pretending to be Menendez, and Trump seemed to, well, welcome that call.
How are you? Congratulations on everything. We're proud of you. Congratulations. Great job. You went through a tough situation. And I don't think a very fair situation, but congratulations.
Then, after Menendez's briber Melgen went to prison eventually for Medicare fraud, Trump granted him clemency and saved Melgen 15 years in prison. Why that was, I don't think we'll ever find out, but it was interesting. Then finally, when Menendez was indicted this time round, Trump's reaction was, well, odd.
Can you imagine how much crooked Joe Biden has stolen and what's in some of his many homes? I wonder how much they got paid for rigging the election. Menendez is one of many, a small-timer at that. Every Democrat should resign from the Senate.
And just before we wrap up, I should mention that moderate Democrats seem to be getting a taste for bribery, because last week, House Democrat Henry Cuellar was charged with accepting $600,000 in bribes over a 7-year period from an oil and gas company owned by the government Azerbaijan, as well as a bank headquartered in Mexico City. The deal was allegedly for Cuellar to give preferential foreign policy treatment to Azerbaijan and to influence executive branch officials to help that Mexico City bank. And those charges are off to a good start, because 3 people connected to the investigation have already pled guilty. That is, of course, John, assuming that they didn't just indict Cuellar because he's a poor Latino kid. Come good.
Tugs at your heartstrings. Well, Trump's trials don't seem to be having a negative impact on his polls, certainly not in the swing states that are likely to decide this year's election. The former president leads Joe Biden in 5 of the 6 most competitive states. That, according to a new series of polls this week from Siena for the New York Times and the Philadelphia Inquiry. Trump losing only Wisconsin. Amongst registered voters, among likely voters, Trump wins Wisconsin but is behind in Michigan. Joe Biden won all 6 of those states in 2020. And Biden's most likely path to re-election this year is to somehow hold on to the Rust Belt of Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But that's looking like quite a stretch right now.
Yeah, look, we might break this poll down more on Friday because it's really interesting. But I just want to say just now, this is honestly the worst poll for Biden I've seen all year.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Let me bring up those registered voter numbers of yours just for a second again. And now I'll put next to those numbers who registered voters say they will vote for in the Senate races in 4 of those states. And you'll see in all 4 races, the Senate candidate is doing much, much better than Biden. In Nevada, they're doing better by 14 points. And by the way, those Democrats don't have the Biden issues with youth, with Latinos, or with black voters. So what does that tell you? It tells you that this is not a one-off little polling issue or an artifact of some kind from statistics. The problem is Biden. And he's got a serious problem that other Democrats don't seem to have. But while we're talking polls, Monmouth recently asked voters whether they'd consider voting for third-party candidate Robert F. Kennedy, and Democrats were slightly more likely than Republicans to say they would. That's fine. But then they asked people if they were aware that Kennedy claims autism is linked to vaccines, and about half of Republicans and 6 out of 10 Democrats said they were aware of this. And then they asked the same voters if they'd consider voting for Kennedy. I asked them one more time. This time, 8% more Republicans said they would consider voting for him, almost 20% of the total Republicans, whereas the share of Democrats that said they'd consider voting for Kennedy dropped by 7 points to 1 in 10. So that suggests that the RFK vaccines thing could hurt Trump badly. And it might explain why this week Trump put out this video.
Republicans, get it out of your mind that you're going to vote for this guy because he's conservative. He's not. And by the way, he said the other night that vaccines are fine. He said it on a show, a television show, that vaccines are fine. He's all for them. And that's what he said. And for those of you that want to vote because you think he's an anti-vaxxer, he's not really an anti-vaxxer. That's only his political moment.
If Trump feels the need to sell himself as the real anti-vaxxer, this election could get even more depressing. Although we should emphasise that even now, RFK is only on the ballot in 5 states: Michigan, Utah, Hawaii, Delaware and California. His campaign also says that they've gathered enough signatures for 6 other states: North Carolina, Nevada, Ohio, Idaho, Nebraska and Iowa. But we'll see about them, I imagine.
Yeah, indeed. So Trump, meanwhile, hit the campaign trail on the weekend with another big rally in New Jersey. But it didn't go 100% to plan. He confused former President Jimmy Carter with 1970s tennis star Jimmy Connors.
We're going to evict this man, the worst president by far. Jimmy Connors is good. He's also happy.
Well, Jimmy Carter isn't on Twitter much these days, but the real Jimmy Connors tweeted out a reply. Who knew? Connors 2024 with a nice little campaign button as well.
Look, that rally was a pretty big rally, though, Connors or otherwise. Have a look. Trump said it had 100,000 attendees.
Really?
Yeah, well, if you're looking at that footage and thinking that doesn't look even close to 100,000 people, you're right. Firstly, because this footage was taken 30 minutes before the rally started, but also because the city spokesperson estimated the crowd to be 80,000, not 100,000. And on top of that, the capacity on the beach for the event was supposed to be 20,000, so that 80,000, questionable. But then the spokesperson said the 80,000 estimate included not only everyone in attendance, but also everyone who came into the city but didn't attend, and also everyone on the boardwalk, and also everyone on Trump's motorcade route.
I'm pretty sure they call those people pedestrians.
Yes, exactly. So it seems, John, all these years later, some things like wildly inflated rally numbers do not change.
Election 2024. What's at stake?
Silence of the Lambs. Has anyone ever seen the Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter is a wonderful man. It's the late, great Hannibal Lecter. We have people that are being released into our country that we don't want in our country. They're destroying our country, and we're sitting back, and we better damn well win this election, because if we don't, our country is going to be doomed.
And that is it for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you at the same time next week, Wednesday, 10 p.m. on ABC TV, anytime from 9 p.m. on iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And we're going to Fireside Chat on ABC News at 8 p.m. Eastern on Friday night, and it's also on iView and online.
Bye-bye.